Do you think it's cheating? Does anyone want to? Yeah. You think it's cheating? Okay, so that's one. Vegan as in like today in this world we have vegan meat, vegan chicken, vegan pork. Yeah. So you don't think it's cheating? Okay. So one person thinks it's cheating, one person doesn't think it's cheating. Anyone else? So at the moment it's 50-50. You think it's cheating? Okay. You think it's cheating. Do you want to explain or no? Yeah. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. So my experience, even without this vegan meat, so in Friday nights, usually Friday nights we have vegan options, and they were giving us this little potato squares. I don't know what they were, and I loved it. It was really nice. We even had a HSP on Monday night, and I liked the potato on Friday night a lot better than what I liked the HSP on Monday. So, is it classified as cheating? To some people, sometimes fasting options is even better than the non-fasting options. So, is it cheating? Um, I think we'll just skip straight to the main point, which is what did Christ do when he fasted? So I think it's Matthew chapter 4, verse 2. And this is how Christ fasted. And when he fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. So I think the way Christ fasts is also the way we are supposed to fast. Christ hungered, so we also have to hunger. No matter, we follow what the church says. All these vegan options is still in with the rules of the church, so it's obedience. But as long as we are staying hungry and we're being hungry for God, then I think that's what fasting is. What does everyone think? Yeah? And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. So Abuna Daniel is currently outside, but he's a bit held up. So just until he comes inside, we're just going to do another hymn before we get started. So, any preferences for what hymn we do? Yes, no, maybe. Sorry. Sorry, guys, just some technical difficulties. Good stuff. All right, anyway, I think there's no need to try delay with him anymore. But so as you all know, we are studying Tobit. We are up to chapter 4, and we are blessed today with Father Daniel, who will be continuing us with the Bible study. So please make him feel welcome, as I'm sure he is.
Five rows. Nah, boys. Just move. So 5 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now that's the 6th row. You just sat down. That's the 6th row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the first row. 5 rows. 5 rows. Uh-huh. Come closer. The reason I do that is so that I can actually see you all and I can talk to you all. It's a blessing to be here. So we're doing the book of Tobit. Am I able to sit down? Someone can have a Bible. Do you have any Bibles? Something that has Tobit in it? I haven't got the Septuagint. What are you guys using? Some use the Coptic and some use the study Bible. We haven't got an Orthodox study Bible here. Has anyone got an Orthodox study Bible? Is there an app with that, is it? No? Yes? Sorry, guys. I should have come with my Bible. I'm a very bad priest. Huh? Is it an app? Hold on, I'll just see if I can actually just find a PDF. Oh, EPUB. Oh, perfect. Genius. Love it. All right. How are we, guys? So have you all been attending all of these talks? So has everyone been doing Tobit for the last 3 chapters? If you haven't, just tell me, just so I know like how much to kind of give you background. Who has been there for the last 3 weeks? Is it the last 3 weeks? Yeah. Who has been there for the last 3 weeks? I can't see your hands. You guys are so shy out here. Yeah, so some of you, who hasn't been here? All right, so about half of you. Okay. So I'll go through and just give you like a bit of a background just to kind of bring everyone up to speed. Now the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, God, amen. So this is the book of Tobit. Now, if I said to most people, have you read the book of Tobit? Almost everyone would say no. And the reason for that is that you actually won't find it in your normal Bibles. Do you guys know why? Yes, it's part of the Deuterocanonical books. Does anyone know what the Deuterocanonical books means? What is the Deuterocanon? Beautiful. So it means the second books. And the reason for that is that you had the first canonical books and then the second canonical books. That's actually something we call a misnomer. It's actually not true. What you said is true, but it's not true. And the reason for that is that in the Orthodox Church, in the Catholic Church, these books, which are sandwiched in between the Old Testament and New Testament, were always part of the Bible. They were always part of the canon. But for the Western churches, they were something considered the second canon, something that came after the canon. It's actually not the case at all. So ideally, you all have an Orthodox study Bible which has these books. And that includes books like Tobit, Daniel, the Dragon, Bel and the Dragon, other books that are quite lovely, actually. And this is one of the most beautiful ones, the book of Tobit. Now, the book of Tobit that we're reading now was probably written somewhere between the 4th to the 2nd century BC, so about 200 to 400 years before Jesus. All right, and the story itself is that of a love story. So girls love this one. It's a love story. I'll explain where the love comes in. But for now, what I want you to understand, and especially as you go through the next chapters, is that this is a story of a father, Tobit, sending out his son, Tobias, out into the world to find a bride, to save that bride, and then to bring her back to the house rejoicing. What does that remind you of? A father sending his only son into the world to find a bride, save the bride, and then bring her back into the father's house. Someone called John or something, or Mark, I don't know, Fatma, no. Does it remind you of someone? I need to hear you guys. If I can't hear you guys, I'm going to hassle you big time. What was that? Yeah, it's the story of Jesus. The Father sends his Son, Jesus Christ, into the world in order to find a bride, us, marry that bride, save that bride, us, the church, and then bring us back to the Father's house. And so that is the kind of overarching theme. So I told you that this was written probably 200 to 400 years before Jesus. But there's a problem. Does anyone know the setting in the first 3 chapters? Where is Tobit? Where's Tobit? Is he walking on the Corniche? Is he in Ramsgate? Is he in Macquarie Fields? Where is he? Sorry? Germany? No, he's not in jail. No. Where? It's the same place that Jonah went. Where's that? Sorry? Naphtali? No, that's the tribes from the tribe of Naphtali. What's the place? Nineveh. Yeah. So Nineveh, okay? And so this is part of the Assyrian exile. So what happens is you have all the Jews. You've got the southern kingdom, the northern kingdom, all these Jews, the 12 tribes, one of them being the tribe of Naphtali, which is in the northern kingdom of Israel. And they get conquered by the Assyrians. The Assyrians conquer them and they exile them. They destroy a lot of them, but they also take them back into Assyria. And that's where they go. Now, there's a big problem there because the Assyrian exile took place in 722 BC, 720 years before Christ. Yet there's a lot of things in this book that make us aware that it was probably the 4th to 2nd century that it was written. So there's a discrepancy there. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It may be an account, it may be a number of accounts that have been stitched together into this one account. We don't know, but there's certainly a discrepancy there. All right, so we hear about Tobit. Tobit is a great man, he's a good man, he's a holy man. He takes care of burying the dead. He takes care of the poor. He sacrifices for everyone around him. One day, he sacrifices people around him and he hears that somebody has died outside the city. So he goes, because he's in Assyria and these people are being killed. This is kind of like akin to maybe being in Egypt and you're being persecuted by the government and people are being killed. So Tobit goes outside the city walls to bury this person. As he's going there, he falls asleep and some pigeon does a poo in his eyes. Yeah, that's what happens. All right, does a poo in his eyes and he goes blind. And so his wife basically comes to him and says to him, same kind of thing that Job's wife said to Job. I'm not saying anything about women, but it's a pattern, all right, that she says to him, you might as well just curse God and die. Like, your God doesn't care about you. You're blind. And so then he has a prayer. And in that prayer, one of the things he does is he says, I can't handle the affliction of my people. I'm basically ready to die. I've been trying to do the right thing, but it's obvious that no matter what we do, the world is not going to be a better place. That's Tobit. Tobit has a son called Tobias. Coolies? Then we hear about another character. In chapter 3, verse 7, which you'll be here last week, probably you would have heard it, is we hear about someone called Sarah. Now, Sarah must have been this really beautiful girl because she attracted 7 husbands. Problem is, every one of the husbands, before they get into the wedding chamber is in your hotel room, all right, for the wedding night, before they even get into there, the husband drops dead. Okay? Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. Okay? And it says that there's a demon that has been killing these husbands by the name of Asmodeus. Now, everyone seeing this is thinking she must be killing her husbands, right? What are the odds? Like, one died of a heart attack, no worries. Second one had a stroke, no worries. Next one tripped and fractured his hip and died on the spot. Next one died of pneumonia. Like, it's more than a coincidence. So then they started saying to her, obviously you're the one that's killing your husbands. And so everyone's starting to mock her. So she goes and prays. Tobit is praying, saying the world is stuffed. Sarah is praying, my world is stuffed because my husbands keep dying. And everyone keeps attacking me and saying that I'm killing my husbands. Then we hear that Raphael, Archangel Raphael, hears the story. Hears their prayers. Hears Tobit's prayers. Hears Sarah's prayers. Does anyone know what the name Raphael means? Yeah, very good. It means God heals. God heals. And so Raphael then, if you read in verse 3, it says these exact words. The prayer of both was heard in the presence of the great glory of Raphael, and he was sent to heal the two of them, to remove the white films from Tobit, to give Sarah of Raguel to Tobias the son of Tobit as a wife, and to bind Asmodeus the evil demon. And so you hear then, his name means to heal, and so he goes out now to heal both Sarah, who is being left without husband, and to heal Tobit, who is on death's door, worried about what is happening to his people. And that kind of brings us then to chapter 4, where we start now. So I'm going to read the first few verses. If you guys have it? No, you don't have it on the screen. No, you don't know. It's coming. If not, you can just send it by... Oh, you can't do that. I was going to say they can send it by WhatsApp, but I'll read it. Listen to my voice. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. On that day, Tobit remembered the silver he had entrusted to Gabriel at Rages of Media. So he said to himself, I requested death for myself. Remember in his prayer, he said, I'm ready for death. Why do I not call my son Tobias to make this known to him before I die? So what happens is he feels he's about to die. And so he says, I remembered somebody owes me 10 talents of silver. I gave it to somebody. We hear about in chapter 1 that I gave 10 talents of silver, which is a lot of money back then. And so he goes, before I die, my son better know about it. So he says, I'm going to call my son and I'm going to get him to go get those 10 talents of silver to get them back for him. And that's where we kind of start then. We heard in chapter 1, verse 14, that Tobit originally was a purchasing agent. So he traveled around all the places, and that's why he gave the 10 talents of silver to this person called Gabriel. Before he actually sends his son, he teaches him. He gives him instructions. And that's what basically all of chapter 4 is. It's a series of instructions to him saying, look, I'm going to send you out into the world. Tobit has no idea about Sarah, has no idea about these 7 husbands that keep dying. All he knows is that he's about to die. He's got 10 talents of silver hidden somewhere. And so he wants his son to go get those 10 talents. But he's worried about his son going into the world, so he gives him instruction. And that's precisely what happens now. So verse 3, the instructions start. So he summoned him, his son Tobias, and said, my son, if I die, bury me, but do not disregard your mother. Honor her all the days of your life. Do what is pleasing to her, but do not grieve her. Remember, my son, that she experienced many dangers for you while you were in the womb. When she dies, bury her beside me in the same grave. So he gives him instructions. And the first instruction that he gives him is, give me an honest death. Because remember, what has he been praying for? Why is he sending his son out? Because he's expecting he's going to die soon. So he says, bury me decently and honor your mother. And then he says to him, but do not grieve her. What do you think he means by that? As in, do not make her mourn for me? No, he's saying, do not grieve her spirit. Live a righteous life so that she is not grieved. If any of you have had kids, do any of you have kids? Do you know what kids? No, so you haven't experienced proper grief yet. Yeah, when your kids are little punks and they do the wrong thing, and they get in trouble, and then you get a phone call from the school, and then you have like PTSD because you remember when you were in trouble at school, then you know what grief means. When your kid's in trouble for punching someone. Not that my kids ever punch anyone, but do not grieve her. And then he says to him, but honor her. And so by doing this, Tobit is repeating one of the 10 commandments in Exodus 20:12. But why is Tobit so concerned about his burial? Give me a decent burial. Bury me decently. Why? Yeah. So if you read in the first 3 chapters, Tobit has lived his life burying those who have no one to bury them. They're in Assyria. Their people are being killed. Often they're being persecuted. They're being murdered. And their bodies are being cast out anywhere. And Tobit then takes it as his mission to go and take those bodies and bury them and give them decent burial. Even to the extent that he contracts ritual impurity. So, back then, you can't actually touch a coffin or a dead body under Jewish law. When you do, you contract impurity. Doesn't mean that you're impure as in you're sinful. It just means that you need to go through ritual purity. You need to go do certain amounts of washing. You might have to sleep outside the house. And that's why Tobit was sleeping outside the house. That's why the pigeon did a poo in his eye, because he was sleeping outdoors. So he has gone blind even for this mission of his of burying people. And so it's something obviously that is quite important to him, close to his heart. I just want a proper burial. And so that's what he tells his son to do for him. And then the instructions continue. He says in verse 4, "Remember, my son, that she experienced many dangers for you while you were in the womb. When she dies, bury her beside me in the same grave." We often forget this as children. And you guys aren't parents, so you need to not forget this. That parents lay down their lives for you. That's something that I had no appreciation of until I became a parent and I started taking the confessions of parents, especially mums, where literally my only advice to them, or my main line that I say to them, almost like a mantra, is parenting is martyrdom. Yeah, it's really martyrdom. You're being crucified daily for the sake of these little punks. To try to parent them with virtue and bring them to God without screaming at them and hitting them is martyrdom. They suffer. When your kid is upset or sad, you don't sleep at night. When your kid has hurt a little fingernail, you don't sleep at night. And so what Tobit is saying to him, remember, my son, the amount of dangers your mother has experienced while she was carrying you. That is why we honor our parents, because they've laid down our lives for us. And then he goes on in verse 5. My son, remember the Lord your God, our God, all your days, and do not desire to sin or to disobey his commandments. Do righteousness all the days of your life, and do not walk in the ways of wrongdoing. For if you walk in the truth, you will be successful in all your works. This theme of remembering the Lord is all over the Old Testament, like Deuteronomy 8:2, where this idea of remembering. But notice something. He says, my son, remember the Lord your God all your days, and do not desire to sin. What do you notice about that? Remember the Lord your God, and do not desire to sin. What strikes you about that? Anything? Anything? Give you a clue? Okay, all right. The order. My son, remember the Lord our God all your days, and do not desire to sin. Look at the order. Remember the Lord your God, and do not desire sin. We often switch that order. All right? Someone comes to God, someone comes to church later in life, whatever reasons. First things they hear: don't have sex before marriage, don't do drugs, don't get drunk, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And we define Christianity as a list of morals. Is that what you hear? The exact opposite, actually. Remember the Lord your God, and do not desire to sin. Whereas we define our Christianity as a list of beliefs, of a list of things that you do. And if you do all these things, you're a Christian. If you don't do these things, then you're not a Christian. In actual fact, it's the opposite. Christianity and Judaism is not a system of beliefs. It's a relationship between God and man, between God and us. And then, as a byproduct of that relationship, we don't sin. And if you mix up that order, you stuff everything up. It's like a husband and wife, right? You meet a girl. A couple of you guys look like you're dating, and a couple of you look like you want to be dating. But when you're looking at your girlfriend, when you're looking at your boyfriend, right? You've never met each other. You've hardly ever spoken. You've hardly ever locked eyes. And then a girl comes to you and says to you, just when you're about to ask her out, and you haven't even really realized, I don't know if I like her or not. And then she comes to you and says, don't ever look at another girl again. Don't even look at another girl again. Don't even speak to another girl. Are you going to hear that? No, you're going to run. You're going to say, she's psycho. But 3 days on, 4 days on, a couple of dates on, you're falling in love. You love her smile. And then she comes to you and says, do not ever look at another girl again. You say, of course, whatever you want. I'm at your feet. Why? Because the relationship comes first. And then as a product of that relationship, there is action. There are byproducts. Of course I wouldn't look at somebody else. Or I shouldn't look at somebody else. But to start the other way around, it's not relationship. It makes no sense. It's just a system. And that's what's so important. We come to church for Christ crucified. And then as a byproduct of that relationship of knowing him, I then act. I then refuse to do certain things. I then start to do other things. That's what happens. But if you go the other way around and someone comes to church and they have no concept of Christ crucified, no concept of relationship, and all they hear is don't do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this, then it's got no meaning, no power. And of course they're going to fail. And so it's important, that order of that we have to pay attention. We have to pay attention. And then he goes on and says, if you walk in truth, in verse 6, you will be successful in all your works. If you walk in truth, you'll be successful in all your works. What strikes you about that? If you walk in truth, you'll be successful in all your works. And then you'll get someone quoting at you, Joseph was with God and Joseph was a successful man. Yeah, as if Joseph wasn't with God, he would be unsuccessful. And then you look at your own life and go, yeah, I'm not doing that well. Like I just got fired. For some reason I smile at the girls, they don't smile at me back. You know, I'm not that rich. Does that mean I'm not with God? Yeah? And this is one of the deviations, the distortions in Christianity. And in the Western church, it actually came to such a point that it's something we call the prosperity gospel, this idea that if you're with God, then everything will be perfect. You know, if you're with God, you're going to be happy, you're going to be healthy, you're going to be wealthy. Every girl you look at is going to smile and love you. Your kids are going to be beautiful. They're going to love you and think you're the greatest dad in the world. You're never going to get cancer. And you're just going to die at a nice ripe old age. Except that doesn't happen. And then people get deflated. And then people start to ask, well, where is God? Where is God? And it's a distortion. And it's a distortion that goes everywhere. Think about the apostles, right? How many of those do you think lived to a nice old age? How many of those do you think weren't martyred? One. And do you know what happened to him? Do you know who it was? John. Do you know what happened to him? They boiled him in oil and he survived and he died lonely on an exiled island. Yeah? But they were with God. Who was closer to God than them? They lived with him literally. And yet they died martyrs. They weren't successful in a material sense at all. And so when we say things like that, Joseph was with God and he's a successful man, it's like a distortion of the gospel. It's a distortion of our whole history of Christianity. The only guarantee we have is that if we are with God, he is with us. Nothing else. Nothing else. Even the language that he says to his son, that you'll be successful in your works, he's not talking about in terms of your job. He's not talking about in terms of your career progression. He's talking to him, and we're going to hear about it now, in terms of his righteous acts in caring for people, success in caring for people. When Tobit said these words, Tobit was poor. That's part of his problem. Tobit was blind. Yet he had spent his whole life being righteous, his whole life working, his whole life being with God, his whole life walking in truth. And yet he was blind now, ready to die, and poor. And he wasn't even in Israel. He was in Assyria, begging his son to just give him a decent burial. We have to keep that in mind. We have to keep that in mind. When we walk in truth, we'll be successful in our trying to attain the kingdom. We'll be successful in showing love to those people around us. We'll be successful every time we lend our hand to somebody to lift them up, they'll be lifted up. Not, I will have a successful life. Not, I'll have an awesome career. Not, I'll have the most beautiful girl on my shoulder, or guy, or whatever you like. Not, I'll have the most beautiful car. Not, I won't get cancer. It's impossible. That's not how things work. That's not how things work. You know, this morning I was surfing with a good friend of mine, an Australian guy, and he's 40, and he has a terrible cancer that he'll probably die from in the next 3 years. And I've never met anyone more godly. He's a guy that lives his life for people around him. He's a guy that brings joy wherever he goes. Yet, he's dying of cancer. Does that mean he was never with God? Do you see then how dangerous that language can be? That if we say those who are successful or those who are with God are successful, then it also means those who are not successful must therefore not be with God. And that language, it courses through our veins in the way we do everything. We talk about, for example, and I rip people for this big time, is that they'll come and say, I ask them, oh, that's awesome, congratulations or something. Yeah, I'm blessed. Oh, so hold on, so if you didn't get the job, you wouldn't be blessed? You'd be cursed? But do you see how the language then pervades everything we do? That we see our success as a blessing and we see our failures as a curse. But they're not. Our failures are often the greatest blessing. They're often the things that move us closest to God. They're often the things that direct us to have mercy on those around us because we've experienced that pain. They're still trying to get on the screen. So is that point sufficiently clear? Does anyone disagree with that? Feel free to disagree. I'll shut you down, but feel free to disagree. No, I'm joking. I'm very nice, actually. I'm far nicer than Father Paul. Far nicer. I'm much gentler as well. All right, I'm just not as fit, according to him. So then verse 7. Do almsgiving. So this is immediately after he says successful in your works. Do almsgiving. So this is what he means by successful in his works. Do almsgiving from your possessions to all who do righteousness. When you do almsgiving, do not let your eye be envious. Do not turn your face away from any poor man, so the face of God will not be turned away from you. Do almsgiving based on the quantity of your possessions. If you possess only a few, do not be afraid to give according to the little you have. You are storing up a good treasure for yourself in the day of necessity. For almsgiving delivers us from death and prevents us from entering into darkness. Indeed, almsgiving is a good gift for all who do it before the Most High God. Does anyone know what almsgiving is? It's a very simple question. It's not a trick question. Almsgiving. Yeah, so charity, call it charity. And so he says, almsgiving to all those who do righteousness. Now, in after the exile, which means basically after 500 BC, by the Babylonian Empire, every time, almost always, that word righteousness is translated from the Hebrew into the Greek Old Testament, which is what we use here, the Septuagint. It's translated with the word elimosini, which means almsgiving. Righteousness gets translated as almsgiving. It's very strange. But it's almost like there's a connection between the two. That when you give, somehow it's connected to righteousness. The righteous one is the one that gives. Why? Because righteousness is above all the property of God. St. Paul says in Romans, this is the righteousness of God is revealed in Christ. Almsgiving is the manifestation of that righteousness. So think about God and the way he acts with us. He is righteous, but how does he manifest that righteousness? In the greatest act of charity, to embrace us as we are, as disastrous as we are, to have mercy on us as broken as we are, to offer himself to us as useless and undeserving as we are. Yeah? It's an act of righteousness, is almsgiving, is offering himself to us. Sorry, you guys. Almsgiving forgives sins. Where do you have that? Which verse? Indeed, almsgiving is a good gift for all those who do. What translation did you just quote? What's that? Okay, I've got no idea what that translation is. But look, there are certain. So, okay, I should have probably started with this. There are different manuscripts for the book of Tobit. You will find there's the Hebrew text, there is the Septuagint, and then there are other manuscript variations. And so that's why you get some different things. The Septuagint is the most reliable because that's the translation of the church, effectively. But what's your question? No. But almsgiving is, and I'll talk about that now, is a process of us sharing in the mercy of God. And that means that when I act like God in giving mercy to those around me, then he will have mercy on me. So it doesn't forgive sins, but when I give, then it makes him look at me and forgives me. Yeah? You get what I'm saying? So he then, one of the first things he says about it, he says, do not let your eye be envious. Do not let your eye be envious. About what? What does that mean? Do almsgiving from a possession to all those who do righteousness. When you do almsgiving, do not let your eye be envious. What does that mean? What do you think it means? You got to say something. You got to think something. Huh? Yeah, okay, that's one possibility. Not quite there, but almost there. Yeah. Yeah. So what he's basically saying is that the idea of being envious is when you give, don't be focused on whether they're deserving of it. Don't be focused on, I need this money, why should I give it to them? They need it more than me. Don't be focused on that at all. Rather, remember something. You know, we are so, again, convinced and focused on these ideas that I have my money and that I give part of my money to the church. I give part of my money to the poor. I am the one that is giving to the poor. Where did your money come from? But I worked hard, Abuna. I worked hard my whole life to make this money. Yeah? Where did your capacity to work hard come from? Where did your capacity to think come from? Where did your capacity to be in Australia in a place that you can make money come from? Where did your capacity to not get cancer and drop dead on the spot come from? Him. That is why in the liturgy, observe something. We pray, remember all of these oblations that we offer you. But where did we get those oblations from? We offer these oblations from what is yours. From what is yours. We think we're good because we come and bring, mind you, oblations, you know, in the early church, there was a basket, people would bring food, drink, whatever else. The priest would come and take one piece of bread, a piece of wine, they'd put it in the basket and they'd come forward, which is what we do in the festal liturgies. And then the priest would pick one piece of bread and the blood on the wine, and that becomes the body and blood of Christ. Okay? That's what the oblations are. So people would come to church literally bringing food. One piece of bread, one piece of wine would be used for the liturgy, and then they'd eat the food together afterwards. They're the oblations. But when we say that, we say we offer these oblations from what is yours. Yeah? When we take care of the poor, we take care of the poor from what is his. When we take care of the church and make a donation, we give from what is his. It's not ours. It's not ours. That's why even the language of the early church is this idea that as Christians we are stewards. We are stewards of God's creation. We are stewards of our wealth. But it's not ours. It belongs to him. It belongs to him. And so do not let your eye be envious because it was never yours in the beginning. Yes, God gave you the capacity to work hard and to take care of your family and to do all these other things and to build wealth. Nothing wrong with that. But when you give, it's not yours. It's his. Always remember that. Always remember that. The next time you're about to pay your tithe and you're like, it's a bit heavy this time, you know, like I can't afford it this time. I wanted to buy a ring. I wanted to do whatever. Then remember, it's not yours. It's not yours. Always have that in your mind. And when you give, don't expect reward. And then he continues, do almsgiving from your possessions. And this, in fact, is advice that Tobit gives his son Tobias from his own experience, because he has spent his life giving from everything that he has to those around him. And then he tells him there are 4 advantages to almsgiving in verses 7 to 11. 1, God's face will not be turned away from you because you never turned away from the poor. You never turned your way from the poor. And that kind of comes back to what you were asking about, you know, does almsgiving somehow forgive our sins? No. But what it does do is, when I don't turn my face away from the poor, he doesn't turn his face away from me. When I act in a merciful fashion, he acts in a merciful fashion. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. When I forgive people, he forgives me. There's kind of like the interlocked. There's a connection between the two. It's the same principle as, you know, whatever you have done to the least of my brethren, you have done to me, as Christ says. It's the same principle exactly. That's the first thing. God's face will not be turned away from you. Secondly, You are storing up treasure in the time of necessity, it says in verse 9. You are storing up a treasure for yourself in the day of necessity. What does that mean? What is the day of necessity? What is the day when you need it? Judgment Day? Yeah. It's the day that you need not money, not when you're stuck and you're thinking, oh man, I really need $5 more. I wanted to buy that burger. And then all of a sudden you put your hand in your pocket and you find $5. Not at all. It's the day of necessity, the day you need mercy. When you act mercifully, when you act to relieve someone else's burden, then when you need your burden relieved in your judgment, He will have mercy on you. 3, almsgiving delivers us from death and prevents us from entering into darkness. Does almsgiving really prevent death? If I give to the poor, is that really going to stop me from dying? Did Tobit ever expect that he wasn't going to die? He was expecting he was going to die. So what does he mean by that? It's simple. It's not hard. What does he mean by that? Does he mean physical death? Does he mean physical death? No, it doesn't mean physical death. He's talking about the end of time. He's talking about death or darkness is a symbol for Sheol, for the place of darkness, for Hades. So he's saying that when you give, when you share in the mercy that God has for the world, then that mercy will save you at the end times. And then he ends with a remarkable sentence. Indeed, almsgiving is a good gift for all who do it before the Most High. Almsgiving is itself the gift from God. Almsgiving is itself the gift of God. When I give, that is the gift. We rarely recognize this because when we give, we share in the mercy that God has for the world. And forgive me, and again, I'm really sorry, but this idea that we sometimes have that if you give, you'll get back tenfold. If you give, you'll get back. You'll get a nice reward. Yeah, give, Habibi, give some more, give some more. God will always reward you. And then you hear stories. I gave $100,000 and then I looked at my bank account and my job made a mistake and they gave me another $200,000 back. Yeah? So I'm going to keep giving because I keep getting back more. I can't think of a less Christian idea. Yeah? Certainly God does bless us. And of course, God blesses those who give. But that's not why we give. That's not why we give. It's not ours. To give is a duty. To take from what I think is mine, but is actually His, and to give it to others is my duty. When we give, we don't do it for reward. Our act of giving is itself the reward. Because when I'm doing that, I'm acting like God. I'm acting like God. You know, Macarius the Great, they used to say of him that it was like he was a God on earth. Because he had the same mercy for those around him that God has for those around him. He shared in that same act of giving. And so always we need to shift our mind. It was never ours in the beginning to give. We give from whatever we can, but it was never ours in the beginning. And when we give, that is the gift. That is the reward. Nothing else. We don't wait for anything else. Or else, what's the point? It's just a transaction. It's kind of like, you guys, you're all little punks, and you go get married, and then, you charge people, whatever else. Yeah, it's a beautiful wedding reception, and then you have to go, I have to pay $150 or whatever. I don't know what the rate is these days. Because I'm going to the wedding, I have to give you money back. And it's like a transaction. I invited you, but I'm just having to pay you. Do you get what I mean? It's not really that nice. That's not what it's like with this. It's not a transaction. If anyone's about to get married, I'm really sorry. I don't know. You guys keep doing what you're doing. Nothing to do with me. Verse 12. My son, guard yourself from all fornication. Above all, take a wife from among the seed of your fathers. Do not take a foreign woman who is not from the tribe of your father. For we are the sons of the prophets, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our fathers from of old. Remember, my son, that these took wives from among their brothers and were blessed in their children. Their seed will inherit the land. So now, my son, love your brothers and do not be arrogant in your heart against your brothers, the sons and the daughters of your people. Take a wife for yourself from them. For arrogance brings destruction and great disorder, and in such worthlessness there is loss and great defect. For worthlessness is the mother of famine. So what he's saying here is that, my son, guard yourself. So now he's sending him into the world. He's saying, guard yourself from porneia. It's a Greek word. It means fornication. It's basically saying premarital intercourse. Instead, take yourself a Jewish wife. In Genesis, as you know, it talks about this idea of prohibiting anyone marrying someone who is not a Jew. And the reason for that back then is that God was trying to create a holy nation, a pure nation, so that he could save the world with that nation. And every time somebody went outside of the nation to go marry someone, like a Greek, an Italian, whatever, the purity would be decreased because they'd bring their pagan ways into Israel. Now, this is a very, very different situation today. Today, we're in Christ. You go marry whoever you want to marry. You don't have to marry someone who's Egyptian and feel that if you're not marrying someone Egyptian that you're ungodly or you're going to bring impurity to the church. The opposite, in actual fact. But this is just to make it clear, just in case anyone misunderstood that verse about mixed marriages. That's not what we're talking about here. Okay. He goes on. Verse 14. Do not keep overnight the wages of any man who works for you, but pay him immediately. If you serve God, he will pay you. Give heed to yourself, my son, in all your works, and be disciplined in all your conduct. So he goes on now to talk about this idea of not only are we called to take care of the poor in terms of donations or whatever else, but never withhold the wages of someone that is owed. And you have to remember, this is not like today, where there's social security and whatever else. People would earn enough money to survive for the day. And so you could imagine a master who has a large piece of land, he has a number of workers, and he says, yeah, I'll pay you guys in the morning. I'm like, oh, we haven't got enough food for breakfast. We need to buy some food for breakfast. I need milk. And so what he's saying to them here is, never, ever exploit the poor. God himself, we hear in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, is the defender of the poor. So never exploit the poor, but be disciplined in all things. And then he says, and what you yourself hate, do not do to anyone. This is something that they call the negative form of the golden rule. Have you heard of the golden rule before? Yeah? Something Jesus said once before? Matthew 7? Anyone? I'm going to say to you in the negative way. What you yourself hate, do not do to anyone. What's the positive way? Sorry? Yeah, perfect. So Christ says, therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. That's the positive form. Be good to those, or do to others the good that you want them to do to you. Whereas here you find it in a negative form. What you yourself hate, do not do to anyone. And there's many positive, yes, right. Yes. You mean like as in buying Nike shoes because they use people in Thailand to do them? Yeah. I mean, look, you have to draw the line at some point because often we don't know. But certainly, yeah. And it's one of those really hard things to see. And if you're aware of it, certainly you should do everything within your capacity. But it also depends because sometimes what we think is exploiting the poor is actually not exploiting the poor. Certain businesses function in third world countries, and if they weren't there, sure, they may be not paying them what they're worth, but if they weren't there, the economy would suffer much more drastically. So it's hard to make those kind of decisions. But certainly I've got no issue with people buying ethically produced wool or whatever it is. Is that what you mean? Yeah. And then he continues. Do not drink wine unto a state of drunkenness, and do not let drunkenness become your traveling companion. Do not drink wine to drunkenness. That is probably the best statement of our attitude towards alcohol. Every time I do any kind of Q&A or whatever else, one of the questions is always, Abuna, are we allowed to drink alcohol? Are we allowed to drink alcohol? It's a question that always comes up. And I'm not your confession father. I'm not the priest of this church, so I can't tell any of you what to do. All right? But I think this is the best statement of our attitude towards alcohol. Do not drink to drunkenness. I'll use this as a chance to correct things. Because of Islam, in the 1970s, there are many influences on the Coptic church that we don't recognize. One of these is alcohol. One of these is even thinking that clergy can't drink alcohol. You go back into the church a couple of hundred years, you find monks documenting, producing wine. There was no issue whatsoever. And then you start to get people now distorting scriptures, talking about how Christ didn't convert, water into wine. He converted it into fermented juice or some form of grapefruit juice, right? Even though that's totally illogical. And even though the whole early church has a whole history of alcohol, it's ludicrous. And what it is Islam. You know, when I was first ordained a priest, my first confession, I'll never forget it. Guy came in and he said to me, I haven't confessed for, a couple of years. I said, all right, no, I'm expecting a big one, And so he said to me, I had a beer. I said, okay. What'd you do? He goes, no, I just had a beer. I go, you like, cheat on your wife? And he goes, no. I said to him, okay, no. So you didn't do anything wrong after? He goes, no, okay. I go, how many beers did you have? He goes, just one. I go, okay. So where's the sin exactly? I couldn't see the sin. I didn't know what he was talking about. And then I went back to my confession father and I said to him, this guy came in confessing that he had a beer. Is that like a new sin that I haven't heard of? And he said, no. What did you tell him? I said, don't worry about it, go drink. And he said to me, never do that. He goes, because he's brought up his whole life thinking that alcohol is a sin. You tell him to go drink and it's not a sin, like he's going to go off his face. And the reason for that is that Islam. In the 1970s, there was an Islamization of life in Egypt that affected everything, affected the clothes even of a priest, affected how we look, how we dress, how we talk about things, how women dress. You look at photos in the 1940s of women in Egypt, they were dressed quite liberally compared to even how we look today. And so things shifted. One of those things is alcohol. And so that's why we have this idea that alcohol is haram. But even though the language of haram is Islamic. Whereas if you look at scripture, it's very simple. Do not drink wine unto a state of drunkenness. And do not let drunkenness become your traveling companion. Okay? And that's why often as a confession father, I'll say to people, do not drink to excess. And by excess, I mean if you had to drive on the spot. Does anyone know how many standard drinks you can have and drive? 1. That's it. So don't drink beyond that point. Have 1. You want to wait an hour? Have another 1. Don't go beyond that. That's it. Very simple. If you are having that, you will not be drunk. You will not be losing your inhibition. You will not be making silly decisions. You will not be saying stupid things because you're at a point that you can drive. If you're at a point that you can drive, you're at a point that you can have a conversation. You can have a point that you can talk to somebody. You're at the point that you can make a decision. Never go beyond that point. Yeah? Simple rule. Simple rule. But to then turn around and say alcohol is wrong, it's like saying the creation of God is wrong. For some people, they shouldn't drink alcohol because they have no control over it. That's a case-by-case basis. Just as for some people, I will counsel them to be careful with what they eat, careful with what they watch, careful with what they do, because they haven't got strength in that particular area. But that doesn't mean the whole concept is wrong. Do you guys get the point of what I'm saying is? Alcohol is creation of God. There's nothing wrong with it. It's something that gladdens the heart according to Scripture. But it is the abuse. It is the drunkenness. It is the lack of inhibition that comes after more than 1 drink. And people often say to me, yeah, but I'm fine. Rubbish. The government says very clearly, based on medicine, you cannot go beyond 1 to 2 drinks and drive. Because if you do, your inhibitions have decreased. The same thing happens in every conversation. Yep, go for it. They can't control? Yes, yeah. So that never happens. Yeah, so that's something that we talk about. Never. It's never happened in the history of humanity that someone has 1 drink of alcohol and gets addicted. I can't control, as in some people are, for whatever reason, they're depressed, they've got issues inside their heart, they've got other things, they're looking at alcohol as an escape, and so they can't control themselves to 1 drink. They'll always have another drink afterwards. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. But for most people, that's not the case. For most people, the problem is that either they use alcohol for a particular purpose, or that alcohol is a repressed thing, and so then whenever it's available, it's overindulged in. Yeah? So I think it's all about balance and moderation. That's why I'm saying it's something that happens between you and your confession father to have a conversation about. But the basic rule is 1 to 2 standard drinks maximum ever on a particular evening. Cool? Any questions about that? Yeah. Speak to your confession father. Speak to your confession father. Essentially, yes, speak to your confession, Father. Because fasting in itself also is about giving up things that are also good. Like there is absolutely nothing wrong with like a 5+ Wagyu T-bone. You know, it's the greatest thing that God has ever done on this earth. Okay? But in Lent, we give it up. Yeah? Not because it's bad, not because it's evil, not because it's corrupting me, but because I'm giving up even that in order to break my own desires. Yeah? And so alcohol generally will form part of that as well, which is why most people fast from alcohol during the fasts. Any more questions about that? Yeah. If Father Paul asks, say that I said everyone can drink as much as they want, I'm joking. I'm joking. Do not use that as green light. I said one until you speak to your confession, Father. And he may tell you not to drink at all. All right, and then verse 16. From your bread give to him who is hungry, and from your clothing give to the naked. If you have more than what you need, if you have more than you need, do almsgiving, and do not let your eye envy at almsgiving when you do it. Spread out your bread on the grave of the righteous, and do not give it to sinners. Yeah? So again, we hear about this idea of do not let your envy affect how you do things. And that's probably going to Deuteronomy 15:10, where it says, you shall give to him indeed, and not let your heart begrudge it when you give to him. Because often what happens is people will give, and then inside it's like, oh man, I don't even deserve it. You know, they're probably not even homeless. The church has heaps of money, you know. And then you have those kind of ideas where he's saying, don't be like that. And then he says, spread out your bread on the grave of the righteous, but do not give it to sinners. What does that mean? Some translations have the text, or some manuscripts have it like this: pour out your wine and your bread on the grave of the righteous, but do not give it to sinners. Yeah, well, the reason I asked that question is because the meaning is disputed. No one has any idea what's going on there. You know, it almost sounds like it's like, not that I've ever seen this happen, but you know, like pour a drink out for the homies. Yeah, for those who are dead. That's what it sounds like. And actually, in fact, that was a pagan practice where they would take bread and wine and go to a cemetery for those who are dead, and it's called a funerary offering, where they would offer food and wine there as a kind of way of honoring the dead. The problem with that is that Deuteronomy kind of avoids this and talks about this idea of avoiding this pagan practice. Also, as I said before, when you came into contact with a tomb, you actually contracted ritual impurity. So for a Jew, they couldn't do that. They weren't, this idea of visiting a gravestone or whatever else is something that is actually foreign. It's a really Western idea. It doesn't really go back to Judaism. Because, you know, in Judaism, if you were standing on your veranda and then there was a funeral and someone was carrying a casket and you just happened to be leaning out over the casket from your second-story building, you get impurity. Yeah? So it's unclear exactly what this is about. The basic point is probably close to what you just said, which is the idea of don't avoid with sinners, be careful where you give your money, those kind of ideas. But we're not exactly sure. Verse 18 to 19. Yeah. Give to those who are sinful? No. It seems to be he's just trying to say to him, don't associate with sinners. Yeah, don't let them be the ones that influence. But it's unclear. It's a very unclear verse that even I read St. Augustine's commentary on it, and it didn't really shed any light. Seek counsel from every sensible man, and do not treat any useful advice with contempt. At every opportunity, bless the Lord your God, but more than this, ask that your ways may become straight, and that all your paths and purposes may prosper. For not every nation has understanding, but the Lord himself gives all that is good, and as he desires, he humbles whoever he wills. Now, my son, let none of my commandments be removed from your heart. So he gives very practical advice here. Only listen to the advice from those who are sensible. Yeah? Ask the Lord for direction, because not every nation has direction. And that's really basic. But think about it. How many times in our lives do we go to people and we go to them for advice, and those people are not qualified to give advice? Aslan, they weren't asked for the advice. And they often give terrible advice. But they give the advice I want. Think about it in your own lives. Yeah? All the time. All the time. I've got girls that come up, oh, Buna, I want to have confession. There's this guy. I said, yeah, but why are you coming to me? Oh, it's just my confession father. I didn't really like the guy. he thought there was a major problem, and he kind of said there was major red flags. But I heard you're really wise, and I want your advice. Yeah? You don't want advice. You don't want advice. And so we do this all the time. So what he's saying is only take your advice from those who are sensible. And remember that we as Israel have the law which is guiding us. And then he says something strange. He says, but the Lord himself gives all that is good. All that is good. Now who's giving this advice? Who said this? But the Lord himself, he says here, but the Lord himself gives all that is good. Who said those words? Tobit. Now Tobit is dying, or about to die, poor and blind. Does that mean he's being poor, his poverty? He's about to die. His blindness is good? Yeah. Because all that comes from God is good. Everything that comes to him is good, even if it doesn't look good. And that's why he says, but the Lord himself gives all that is good, and as he desires, he humbles whomever he wills. Because sometimes what looks like it's not good is actually for my humility. He's actually preparing me. He's actually purifying me. Because whatever comes from the hand of God is always good. And then he continues, and this is the last part. Now, remember, he began this chapter talking about these 10 talents that he wants his son to get. He got distracted before he told his son where even to get it from, and then gave him these commandments. And now he says in verse 20, now let me point out to you the 10 talents of silver I entrusted to Gabriel, the son of Gabrius in Ragas of Media. Do not fear, my son, that we have become poor, for you are very rich if you fear God. Stay away from every sin and do what is pleasing before him. Do not fear, my son, that we have become poor, for you are very rich if you fear God. I love this last verse. Do not fear, my son, that we have become poor, for you are exceedingly rich if you fear God. And you know why I love this verse? Because listen to what he talks about. Tobit is poor. He's been struggling with being poor. He's been giving from his poverty the whole time. Yet he has 10 talents of silver that he's never accessed his whole life. He could have went to it any time. And the only time now he wants to recall it is not for himself. It's just for his son. Before he dies, he wants his son to know there are 10 talents of silver. You know? He gives from the little that he has. He doesn't see his poverty as an affliction. He doesn't see his poverty as a curse from God. Else he would have went and got 10 talents of silver. You know? He feels somehow living in my estate, where I am right now, caring for those around me is enough. That is what makes me rich before God. Not how much money I have. Not how much money I have. And recently I've had the exact same conversation with two people, and they both said to me the exact same words. You know, Father, I just wish I was more successful and more wealthy so I could donate more to the church. And you know what my answer was to both of them? Don't worry about how much money you have or you don't have. Just donate from whatever your capacity is. Does it make a difference that you can do an on-the-spot $5,000 donation or that you give $50 from your capacity? Which one is more precious to God? I'm pretty sure there was a parable that Christ spoke about. Does anyone remember it? Anyone? 2 something, 2 cents, 2 francs, 2 mites. You know? The widow comes in, she's got nothing. The publican comes in, full of money, he's full of money. She comes in and just gives 2 mites. A fraction, nothing. But it's from her capacity. And that is more precious in the eyes of God than anything else. Same thing here. Same thing here. Do not fear, my son, that we have become poor, for you are very rich if you fear God. And this is how Tobit lives. All right? And that's where now leads us into chapter 5, which someone else will take the blessing of. Glory be to God. Thank you, guys. Any questions about that or anything else? Feel free to ask. Anything you want. Or not at all. No? Thank you. No, God bless. Sorry if I went too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys, for coming. So as you